Hi everyone, my name is Kelly Halstead. I am a behavior analyst at Connecticut Behavioral Health in Cheshire, Connecticut. Today we're going to be talking about discrete trial instruction. What we're going to accomplish today is talking about discrete trial instruction and its main components, data collection, positive reinforcement strategies, preference assessments, the pre-MEC principle, behavioral momentum, and a token economy. So what is discrete trial? It is a one-to-one teaching method that teaches skills in a planned, controlled, and systematic manner. It's a technique that is derived from applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, and it's data-driven. There are no guesses as to whether or not the task was learned. Who is discrete trial appropriate for? Students who struggle with traditional teaching methods, require high levels of repetition, students who require high levels of prompting in a systematic way, and students who exhibit developmental disabilities. Let's review some basic DTI terminology. I have worked in many programs across the state, and some of these terms get kind of thrown around loosely or are not used properly within a program. So when we're really talking about terminology, it's important that everyone in your program that's working with you understands what exactly you're referring to or talking about. So what is a DTI program? It's the outline of the goal or objective. These can be as specific as completely outlined within a student's IEP. It can also be a simple task such as unpacking, which might not be highlighted on an IEP, or a student-specific plan, but it's something that's specific to the classroom objective. Having students independently unpack, for example, so that you might write or create a program for that. So this is the sample program sheet. Obviously, this information can be displayed in a multitude of ways. This is what my specific program sheet looks like. So I have at the top here, I have the actual program title. The student, this is just some information for me for cataloging what the actual goal will be. If there's materials needed here, this particular program, it says, let's look at the set list. Student reinforcers might be written in here. Your SD, again, this one says see set list because there would probably be more specific instructions there. And then I have broken out what the instructor is supposed to do and what the student response is. And then we have our prompt hierarchy, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So when you have highlighted a program, what exactly is your baseline? So baseline is the initial data that is collected prior to any teaching. So before you present a skill in any instructional format, you want to take baseline data. What's a preference assessment? It is the presentation of items or activities in order to determine a student interest. Prior to running any discrete trial, you need to have a student's reinforcers ready, and you need to make sure that what you're presenting them is reinforcing. So if you take a preference assessment and have those materials ready at your right at your side, ready for the trial, then you'll be in good shape for working through a trial. We're going to talk more about preference assessments later in this presentation. What's our set list? So a set list is a list of specific targets currently being taught within the program. What's a target? A target is the item that data is being collected on. That might be specific words, specific objects, or actions. So here I have listed a sample set list, and again, this can be displayed in a variety of ways. There's no right or wrong way to present your set list or your targets as long as you have all the information with your program. So we have the SD here, the student response, and I just like to have when you've started that criteria and when that criteria is considered mastered for a student outline. So if we're talking about our previous program that I posted, identifying colors, you would see that the first target might be that the student is working to identify red in a field of 3 with 2 distractors. And the student response is that they will touch the red one only. And you'll continue to break down your program content in this way so you can see exactly where your student is making progress. What is a trial? So a trial, one specific DTI trial, is 5 components in order which lead to one data point. And I'm going to go through all of those components with you now. A set is typically 10 trials that make up the one set of instruction. So you can see here, this is a sample column of a data sheet. This right here represents one trial, and then your set is made up of 10 trials. Now, do you have to do all 10 in every set? No, you don't. Absolutely, you do not have to. It's easier for data collection purposes, obviously, to do percentages based on a 10 trial set, but you can do 5, and then there are other ways to document data collection to signify if you want your staff or your support personnel to just run a specific number of trials. Again, this is just a sample discrete trial data collection sheet. So these would all be sets of 10 DTI trials. And then this would be a corresponding graph. So you're going to write the percentage, and then you would plot it on the data point to indicate what your percentage of graphing would be. So going back to those 5 components of a DTI trial, what are they? So you have the discriminative stimuli, also known as an SD, also known as a Q. Those 3 names are can be interchangeably used. You have the instructor prompt, the student response, the instructor response, or the reinforcing stimulus, and the intertrial interval. So we're going to go through each one of these specifically and really dive deep into making sure that while you're presenting DTI trials, you are utilizing all components to make sure that it's an effective trial. So what is the discriminative stimuli, or Q, or SD? It's a distinct and clear event that requires a response. You have to be concise and simple in your language, and you have to deliver it in a clear and firm tone of voice that is easily differentiated from background noise. And once you give that Q or SD, you will never repeat that within the trial. So an example of an SD or Q, going back to just utilizing our example throughout, color identification, which is what I had posted, and then that's what our set list just as an example. So you might say touch, red, very clear, very concise, possibly elevated a little bit in a louder volume, just so your learner has really cued into you and is understanding that it's time for them to work. What is a prompt? A prompt is any form of assistance that is provided within that learning task. And then prompts are provided on a hierarchy, a prompting hierarchy. Now, when you're talking about skill acquisition, in my opinion, and there is a lot of varying research on this, and I'd encourage you to look it up like on your own time. In my opinion, for the sake of this discrete trial learning training, if you will, it's important to focus on prompts that are most restrictive to least restrictive. Why? We are teaching skills utilizing this discrete trial instruction, and we're going to be talking a little bit later in the presentation about this, but I like to focus on errorless learning tasks. We're talking about learners who require high levels of prompting anyway. So if we're utilizing prompting ahead of or instead of errors, our skill acquisition rate, our students' skill acquisition rate will be higher, meaning that they will acquire and retain, hopefully retain the skills that we're teaching them quicker. Because we're not allowing that trial and error learning. Instead we're getting right in and we're saying, this is how you do a task, and then you're going to reinforce that task for what it is. So, and I would encourage you to please email me if you have any questions about this, because this is something that we can possibly even create a whole new training series on, is prompting hierarchies. But for the sake of this presentation, we're going to be talking about prompting hierarchies from most restrictive to least restrictive. So they might look in the form of full physical prompting, partial physical prompting, verbal prompting, visual prompting, gestural prompting, with the final goal being independence in a skill. And also we have to side note, because obviously right now we're in the midst of a pandemic, and it is very possible that we will need to adjust what our prompting protocols look like, especially to be wary of social distancing and all of the above. So hopefully we can get back to learning and teaching as we once did, but for right now we do have to kind of put that on the back burner, that we might have to relook at how we can be prompting our students safely in the future. So this is, again, just a sample of what a prompting hierarchy may look like. Obviously, you are free to adjust it for your program, for your students, for your staff. Why is it so specific? It's so specific because we need to, as people who are providing a scientific method of instruction, such as discrete trial within ABA, need to make sure that everyone is doing their everybody is doing prompting the same way. So when I say I would like student X to be on a partial physical prompting hierarchy, I need to know that every instructor who's working with them will be using 2 fingers to assist the students to complete the task. So when I say the visual prompt, I need to make sure that everybody who's running a trial with that student across the board would be using target placement and proximity prompts. So that's why I have outlined this so specifically. But again, I encourage you to change it to meet your needs within your program. So let's go back to those components of a discrete trial. These are our 5 components. Where are we now? We're at the student response. So the skill or behavior that you are teaching. So what is that end goal for the student? For this particular program that we're talking about, it's that the student touches the red cube. And again, to avoid those response errors, use the errorless teaching. I talked about it a little bit prior, but it's important to kind of dedicate one slide to it. What exactly is errorless teaching? It's the opposite of trial and error learning, and it's meant to prevent that guessing and scrolling behavior and incorrect responses. When you're baselining that teaching task, you want to move up the prompt hierarchy from most to least restrictive, and note the prompt level that was required for that correct answer. When you're presenting a trial, you want to begin with using the prompt level from baseline. So once you have established that baseline without using any prompting, if the student gets like a 0% on baseline, you would go right into that full physical prompt, or whatever would be the highest possible prompt from that for that baseline. Obviously, if it's a verbal type program, you're not going to deliver a full physical prompt unless your learner has specific prompts like touch prompts or whatever. But that's something you would do in conjunction with a speech therapist or other type of therapist. So upon mastery within that skill set, within that prompt level, which is just generally 3 sets of 80% or more, you're going to present the teaching task with the next logical lower prompt level. And you're going to continue to repeat steps 2 and 3 until the task has been mastered to the least restrictive prompt level that is attainable for the student and hopefully independent. So I collect data for every single set of trials within a prompt level. So it's a ton of data, but here's why. When you have a student who might not be acquiring a skill quickly, but is making progress, and when you go to a parent meeting or a PPT meeting, a parent might say, well, they've been working on color identification for 2 months, and I'm not understanding kind of why there's no progress. If you have all of your data, you can say, well, yes, they have been working on color identification for 2 months. However, we have started with, here in March, you can see that we started with a full physical prompt, and here it is the end of April, and they only require a gestural prompt. For some of our students, that's huge progress. It may not seem like it, but if you have all of that documented and graphed out, it shows a really nice progression of reduced prompts. So it is progress, and that's really important for us to give credit to our students who are working so hard, and for us who are working hard trying to get them to understand or master a concept. It's really nice to have all that data presented, available to be presented at meetings. Okay, so here we are again. Let's keep going with where we are within our DTI trial. The instructor response. There are 3 possible instructor responses. If your student exhibits a correct response, you would provide that reinforcement, whatever it may look like. If your student presents an incorrect response, what are you going to do? You're going to obviously block or follow with that prompt toward the correct response, or continue on that prompting hierarchy for the errorless teaching protocol. And if there's no response, you're going to follow with an immediate prompt toward the correct response. As far as data collection, obviously, if your student does deliver a correct response or correct response with the prompt, you would give them a plus on the data sheet. If it's not accurate, or if it's a mistake, or you have to increase the prompt level on your prompting hierarchy, you would give it a negative, and you would either code it as an NR or a P, or whatever your protocol, whatever your data sheet would indicate as such that there was no response from that student. Your reinforcing stimulus is an item or activity designed to motivate the student to respond and respond correctly. So when you're just presenting them something after they've done a trial, if they haven't responded correctly, there's no need to present them with a reinforcing stimuli. You always want to provide choices with your student prior to running a trial. Reinforcers can be presented via token systems or first then board, or immediately following one trial within that set, wherever your student is on kind of the reinforcement schedule. Can be presented on a ratio or interval appropriate for each student need. All of that, all of this information should be presented somewhere on your program sheet to be able to tell all of your staff or support people or therapists or whoever your students are working with that this is their reinforcement plan. If they're working with a token board, do they get a token every 3 correct responses? Do they get a token every correct response? So that's really important information to have highlighted on your student's profile so that whoever's working with them can understand when they're supposed to be getting reinforced. The intertrial interval is simply the brief pause between trials, which should last between 5 or 10 seconds. And during that time, the instructor should be recording your data point and then getting materials ready for the next trial. So we have discussed all of our components of a DTI trial. It seems like a lot, but people, all of you who know that discrete trial can run really quickly. With practice, it's not as cumbersome as it makes these slides make it appear. So just some things to be aware of. Prior to each trial, the instructor must pay attention, or must gain attention and establish attention from the student. So the student should be seated with hands and feet on the floor and hands down on the table. They should demonstrate some type of ready position with their hands down, possibly learn to orient to the speaker prior to even preparing any academic instruction. You would want to make sure that you have a ready response available and established from your students. And they should know that they should not touch materials until told to do so. Those are kind of the prerequisite skills prior to even beginning any academic type discrete trial instruction. So talking about that color ID program back when we first started, if your students cannot sit at the table without touching the stimuli that you're placing down, if they don't have a ready position, where again, maybe their hands are down, they might sit up in their chair, maybe orienting to you as the speaker. it's probably not time to even deliver that instruction, and you should just be working to establish those few guidelines prior to presenting them with academic instruction. When you're delivering a trial, the instructor, you, hopefully, who's watching this video, should only be verbalizing your SD or your Q, any potential reinforcement that's delivered after the student response has been established, and then any prompt, only if you're within that verbal prompting hierarchy level. So there really is not extra talking or kind of bargaining or explaining within a trial. That would kind of make the instruction that you're doing not necessarily discrete trial format. So I'll give you an example. So if you're asked, if a student is asked to maybe touch the red block, touch red, and then come on, you got it, that's red, good job, maybe next time, you got it. I've heard a lot of this back and forth talking. It's really difficult for some of our students to differentiate what's instructional and what's kind of that extra language. So it's just really not appropriate during this time. If you're running a discrete trial, that extra language would not be considered effective during that instruction. So more things to be aware of: the special education teacher and the staff should should designate possible areas or locations in the classroom that can be utilized for discrete trial. There obviously are some, within some discrete trial programs, there are cubbies to utilize, or just a quiet area working on the side of the classroom. I have seen classrooms that work with just small groups or individualized one-to-one student staff ratio, just kind of disperse throughout the room and work quietly. You just want to make sure that your learner understands and associates that with that specific, when it's time for discrete trial instruction, there is that specific area where they kind of go to, and their reinforcers are available to them, maybe a token board is available to them, that they really understand what the expectation is for them to go and do their best learning at that time. And you want to choose those specific skills for instruction. Like I said, in the program that I work in, pretty much every skill is written into a program somehow, but there are those that are definitely worked on more specifically at the table or at in the discrete trial centers, or et cetera. But you want to make sure that you have those specific skills for instruction kind of highlighted, whether they're in a program book or on a clipboard or wherever they may be. You also want to consider that during discrete trial time, there's limited noise levels so that your SDs are differentiated above the noise level, limited visual distractions. You want to make sure that you have all the materials that you need available to you, because once you start to really have those 5 components of that one trial run smoothly, you want to have everything available to you. And you also want to have that reinforcement available. Immediately following that student response, you are delivering them their reinforcement. They earned it. You don't want to say, oh, hang on one second, I have to go across the room and get your favorite toy. No. If you are providing adequate reinforcement, it should be delivered immediately upon that response. More things to be aware of during discrete trial. You want to make sure that you're maintaining a neutral tone. There are times that our students can definitely pick up on our tone of voice as being kind of an indicator of their performance. So you want to make sure that it's neutral. You only want to provide like a higher level of reinforcement and excitability when you're giving that reinforcement after their hopefully correct response. You want to avoid inadvertent gestural cues. So unless your prompt level, again, from that hierarchy is in that gestural cue set, you want to avoid them. Again, our students can really pick up on what's going to make it easier for them to respond. And sometimes people will gesturally indicate what the correct answer may be without even realizing it. So you do want to take care of that. You want to make sure you don't lay out materials the same way for each trial to make sure that our students are actually acquiring a skill, instead of just picking the same, always the left side of the desk, picking the card on the left side, picking the stimuli on the left or right side of the table. You can present flashcards, for example, up and down, side to side, diagonally, and really just move the targets all around the table to make sure that the students are attending to the stimuli and not necessarily the placement of the stimuli. If your student is consistently making mistakes, you want to remove all those materials and perform a preference assessment in order to reignite that motivation. And again, we're going to be talking about preference assessments a little bit later on. So just giving you a sample DTI trial script, the background information for this particular example is that the instructor is running a color ID program. Again, we've been talking about that pretty specifically since the beginning of this. The current set list includes the targets of green, blue, and red. Red is the target of the current set being run. Baseline data has led to the use of a gestural prompt. So we know we're in the gestural prompting prompt hierarchy, and here's our sample. So the instructor places one red card and one blue card on the table. The instructor says, Billy, touch red. Again, please notice my SD voice there. The instructor provides a gestural prompt by immediately pointing toward the card. Billy touches the red card. Yes, nice job, that's red, good for you. The instructor records a plus on the data sheet, and it's the end of the first trial. So you can see that this trial specifically does highlight all of the 5 trial requirements by delivering the SD, delivering the prompt. There is a student response. The reinforcement is delivered in a verbal, like a verbal form, and then the student or the instructor records a plus on the data sheet. That's the end of your first trial. Okay, let's talk a little bit about positive reinforcement. Reinforcement is the backbone of the entire field of applied behavioral analysis. Reinforcement is a consequence applied immediately following a behavior that will strengthen the future behavior whenever that behavior is preceded by a specific antecedent stimuli. So what does that mean? If there is a behavior that you want to see more of, you're adding something immediately following that response or behavior to see it more often. How you respond to a behavior, and for this particular concept, think of behavior not just as the maladaptive behaviors that we're used to talking about, such as kicking or biting or pinching or hitting. You're thinking of a behavior as any skill, essentially. So going back to that color ID program, touching red is the behavior here. How you respond to it is going to impact if it happens again. So if you are responding positively with tickles or stickers or the delivery of a token or playing a favorite movie clip or video clip from our song, the chances are that that student who touched that red cube and then gets all that big exciting stimuli occurring, the chances of them doing that again are very high. So that would be positive reinforcement. So it can be measured as a higher frequency of replacement behavior, a longer duration of behavior, or a greater magnitude or a shorter latency. So how long it takes them to complete that activity, for example. So reinforcement occurs anytime you add or remove a stimuli to increase the likelihood of the behavior occurring again. Positive reinforcement in particular is the addition of a stimuli to increase the likelihood of the desired behavior. So in this diagram, which I'd like to put in here, so it kind of just gives a general picture of every type of reinforcement and punishment, positive and negative, we're going to be focusing really on the upper left-hand quadrant here of reinforcement that applies stimuli after the behavior that you want to see more of and increases the frequency of the desired behavior. So let's really just focus on positive reinforcement during this time. It is the most effective form of reinforcement for behavior change. Now, how do we know what is considered reinforcing for our learners? And who decides what's reinforcing? And how can that information be gathered? A lot of questions there. So I'm going to give an example of, I used to work with a student who would work for peeling a potato. Now, is that something that I consider reinforcing? No, it's not really one of my favorite activities at all. But for this particular student, he loved kind of the having something like a potato that was brown and kind of yucky and dirty. And he was reinforced by removing the skin from the potato and running it under cold water. He got really excited when he got to see like the white flesh of the potato under the skin, and that's what he would work for. Now, would I have offered him something like that? Probably not, because I wouldn't consider that that could possibly be a reinforcing activity or what somebody would choose to work for activity. And how did I know that? Like, how did I know? Well, I found out from talking to his mom and previous caretakers who he just loved the transformation, that he was responsible for the transformation of taking the skin off the potato. It's definitely a far cry from the things that we would consider, like the classic bubbles, iPad time, stickers, tokens, tickles, singing of a silly song, engaging in a silly social exchange that are specific to your students that you work with. How did I know that? What could I do to gather that information? And again, I kind of just listed, these are the basic sticker charts, token boards, a cookie or any dessert after finishing a dinner plate, points toward computer time, high fives, hopefully not now during the pandemic, we can't really do high fives anymore, and verbal praise. Those are such a small list of things that can really be offered student specifically. Like, we can't really create a list of what people or students would consider positive reinforcements because the list is just so extensive. So going back into how we could figure out what is reinforcing, what our preferences for our students, what does that look like? We can perform a preference assessment, which is an observation or trial-based assessment that helps determine a preference hierarchy. So what does that mean? A preference hierarchy indicates what are high preferred, moderately preferred, and lower preferred items or activities. So within your day, thinking about your skill acquisition times, maybe your discrete trial time with your students, your really educational skill acquisition opportunities, you might be providing them with a highly preferred activity during that time because they're working really, really hard to acquire new skills. During more mastered criteria or routine-based learning of skills that have already been mastered or already been acquired and are just kind of becoming more like routine-based learning or generalization opportunities, you might really pull from that moderately preferred or low preferred items on the preference assessment hierarchy, because while those skills have been mastered, it's really not necessary to be for them to be as reinforced as something that would be a skill acquisition component. So preference assessments should be conducted regularly, and they should include varying types of reinforcement, such as tangible reinforcement, social reinforcement, access to activities, and you can do them many ways. Three really basic ways to think about it is you can do an observation, so kind of allow your student to wander around the room, maybe present 5 or 6 things on a table and see what the first thing they pick up and engage with is, the second thing they pick up and engage with is, the third thing, et cetera, et cetera. You may interview. That's how I figured out that my student really enjoyed working for peeling a potato. His mom, his caretakers, told us that that was something that was really preferred for him. You can also provide a questionnaire to students. Some students may be able to fill out a questionnaire independently. Some may need mom, dad, caretakers, whoever may be the necessary caretaker. If you're working in a school setting, there may be home support agencies that can help us really figure out what is preferred for our students. But again, they should be conducted regularly because preferences change. So if you're doing a preference assessment, you know, I know that the program that I work in, we send home like a questionnaire before school even starts, so we can make sure we have the classroom stocked with anything that students may work for. So again, those classic bubbles, puzzles, light up toys, toys that make noise, things like that. But you know, maybe a mom says that their child really works for Thomas the Tank Engine. So we may need to go out and seek materials or stickers or things that are related specifically to Thomas the Tank Engine. When we do that in August, those things may no longer be reinforcing come February or March. So we kind of have to continue to require updated information on that. I know my particular interests definitely change kind of as the seasons change or from week to week. It's so critical to get really updated information on what your students are interested in and what they're willing to work for, especially if you're working on skill acquisition with them. So again, this is just a different kind of illustration as to how we can define or really run preference assessments. So you can ask a person, you might ask them open-ended questions, give them a rank ordering or a choice format, trial-based methods, which would be more of actually providing a discrete trial program with them, like offering single stimulus, multiple stimulus. This is honestly something that's pretty complicated, and we can go into kind of have a whole nother training on just this particular topic of preference assessments. But I really, for this particular group of people that are accessing this training, we should really focus on asking a person or observing the person, or working with your like District BCBA or behaviorist on really focusing on some of those trial-based methods. So positive reinforcement and effective ways to deliver reinforcement in a DTI session. We're going to focus on the PREMAC principle, first then language, behavioral momentum, and token economies. Those are going to be up next. Okay, great. Now we're going to talk about the PREMAC principle. What is the PREMAC principle? It is a relativity theory of reinforcement. What does that mean? It states that it's more probable that more probable behaviors will reinforce less probable behaviors. It's also considered grandma's law. So a grandmother might say to you, if you eat your chocolate cake, then, or if you want, if you want chocolate cake, then you need to eat all of your vegetables. If you want to go outside, then you need to put your coat on. What does that sound like? It's pretty similar in, can be compared with some first then language that we're all pretty well versed in at this point. So PREMAC principle and the first then contingency terminology can be used interchangeably. It must be offering a less desirable stimuli followed by a more desirable stimuli. So it's an effective strategy for teaching compliance, but it needs to be faded as soon as the technique is considered effective. So I have gone in to work within some programs, and you'll see kind of a student on a first then board, and they'll have like first reading, then math, or first use the bathroom, then circle time. That would not be considered PREMAC principle or really essentially first then language, because you're not putting that less desirable stimuli first, followed by that more desirable stimuli. So it's really important to make sure if you're utilizing a first then board, that that's kind of your reinforcer, your signal. So you're saying like, first you're gonna do this one activity that is probably not your most favorite thing, and then we're gonna engage in a more fun activity. So recess, free time, iPad, again, that list would be based off of your preference assessments for your student, what would be considered effective for reinforcement, and you would make sure that you have that least desirable stimuli listed first, followed by a more desirable stimuli. Just using a first then board as like a simple schedule is not an effective strategy for behavior change. You also want to be certain to try to fade out the first then language or even the pre-MAC principle of delivering a less desirable stimuli followed by a more desirable stimuli pretty quickly once the skill has been acquired, because you don't want students to just think that they have to do one thing to gain access to a preferred activity or a reinforcer following that. It's an effective strategy for teaching compliance in that when you're utilizing first then language or the pre-MAC principle, you would make sure that the student knows that you are kind of the keeper of the goods, as you would say. So using a first then board and then having you present that preferred stimuli will make you, the instructor, like a reinforcer by proxy. So you're saying to the student, like, hey, let's get through this non-preferred stimuli together, and then I'm going to provide you with access to that more desirable stimuli once you do for me what I have asked you to do. Behavioral momentum is the use of a series of high probability requests to increase compliance with lower probability requests. So this is maybe how behavioral momentum would look. You would present the student with a simple task and provide a high level of reinforcement. Again, provide a simple task and provide high levels of reinforcement. And you would continue to repeat that until you felt as if you had compliance. And then you would present the student with the desired task of what you wanted them to do and continue with those high levels of reinforcement. So let's provide an example of this. Let's say it's time to go home on the bus, and the student has decided to sit in the hallway and plant themselves in the hallway because they don't want to get home. They don't want to transition to the bus to go home for whatever reason. Let's not get into that whole realm of possibilities, but the direction is to transition to the bus. The student has sat in the hallway, but they have to get up and get on the bus because the bus is waiting for them. So I'm not just going to come over and say, like, stand up, it's time for bus. I might kind of bend down at their level and say, like, touch your nose. If they do it, nice job, good for you. Maybe like touch your belly. Awesome, good for you. Maybe like touch your toes. Great job, stand up. Awesome, let's walk to bus. So I've provided 3 or 4 simple tasks in a quick succession with very high levels of reinforcement. So quick, in fact, that they may not even realize that they are complying with your directive. But you're not just going to kind of swoop in and say, stand up, it's time to go. You're going to kind of use that behavioral momentum strategy to really increase their the speed in which they are complying with directives, the rate of your reinforcement, and they're going to just continue to perpetuate on that momentum. So you want to repeat this as often as necessary until you have had access to your student completing the task. As an instructor, you need to use the high levels of reinforcement to create that chain. Probably more reinforcing than you would naturally be for a simple directive such as touch your belly or touch your nose or touch your head, whatever that would be. Those would be like kind of low demand, low reinforcement directives. But in this instance, in using behavioral momentum, you are using your high rate of reinforcement to perpetuate the momentum. So you're giving kind of an unnecessarily high level of reinforcement to get that chain going. That's really the most important part of behavioral momentum, and really being able to think on your feet of the mastered tasks that your students know and can do quickly with a high level of reinforcement to be able to establish that chain. What happens if the chain breaks? It happens. So for example, continuing with our scenario, it is very possible that you might touch your nose, touch your belly, touch your head, touch your toes, stand up, walk to bus. There might be another flop again, and it's your job to just continue that chain and continue that momentum and keep building upon any successes that you have. You want to continue to build that momentum and make sure to embed the prompt. So it's okay for you to prompt like a touch your belly, touch your nose, touch your head. Nice job, you're doing it. Great job, keep going, let's keep going. By using behavioral momentum, you also minimize the instructor becoming an aversive stimuli. Here's what that means. If you have a student who, again, is flopped on the floor and is really not transitioning to this bus, if you have another staff come in and just say, it's time for bus, and like kind of swoop them up and continue moving, chances are that that instructor is going to be considered to your student as aversive stimuli. So this person kind of came in and played the quote unquote tough guy routine and just kind of required compliance, but maybe didn't necessarily provide those high levels of reinforcement that would go with that. So the chances of the student complying the next time for that instructor are pretty low. You want to use these behavioral momentum strategies to increase your reinforcement value with a student, not necessarily minimize your aversive responses to them. Continuing on, talking about within positive reinforcement, talking about token economies. So everyone in the field has seen a simple token board, such that I have pictured on the screen right now. Obviously, they can be created for unique learners. There can be characters and rules printed right on there. They can be like earning 3 things, earning 5 tokens, 3 tokens, 10 tokens, 20 tokens, however many tokens. They're completely able to be personalized and individualized for your learner. A token economy is a contingency management system that allows participants to earn tokens for presenting specific positive behaviors, which are later exchanged for predetermined backup reinforcement. So how does the learner understand the value of that token? What do you pair the individual tokens with? And what do you know, how do you know what's reinforcing for the learner? And do they understand the difference between tokens and the reward? So probably one of the biggest mistakes that I have seen with token boards is that people, instructors particularly, don't take the time necessarily to train the token board as a reinforcer. So you have to understand that you have to think of it this way. When you're presenting your student with a token board for the first time, if they have not been taught the value of those individual tokens that make up the full token board, chances are they don't understand that they're going to have access to a backup reinforcer at the end once all those tokens are earned, and therefore just earning a token is not necessarily reinforcing enough. So what do you have to do? You need to pair the initial token that's been earned with a higher level reinforcement. A quick edible snack, goldfish, like a little baking M&M, anything that is appropriate for your student to earn. If it's paired with that token initially, that token, that individual token, sticker, whatever it is, a poker chip, a character face, an actual coin, a star, whatever it is, will be paired with that reinforcer, and the student will begin to learn that that token has value. If time is not spent on teaching the student that those individual tokens have additional value, chances are a token board will not be a successful intervention for your student. So you really need to take time to train the student to understand that those tokens do have value. And again, you can pair those individual tokens with anything that you know will be effective for your learner. Go back to the preference assessment and see what you can pair them with. It's possible that you can just take a token that has been earned and pair it with a light up toy for 10 seconds just to give access to it, or blow bubbles while you're giving them a token, just so they understand that that token has value. once they're looking at the token board as you place the token on it, that can demonstrate to us that there's understanding, that they're excited to earn that token, and then you can immediately fade back that secondary reinforcer, deliver the tokens, and then work toward filling the token board for the backup reinforcer. You can also, as you start students on a new token board, you can start by just having a full token board. So maybe after you kind of used a first then board for a little while and your student understands that they can do more than one thing to gain access to a reinforcer, you might move to a token board. I wouldn't just move to a full 10 token board and expect them to be able to do 10, give 10 correct responses to receive their reward. What you might want to do is have that 10 token board, or 5 token board, or any token, any amount of tokens. It would still be the same kind of protocol. You may have that full token board completed, except 1 or 2 at the very end. So your student might need to earn the last 2 tokens to complete the token board, and then have immediate access to that higher level reward / reinforcer. And you'll just continue to backward to take away. So you might do a DTI trial with just 2 tokens to be earned. They earn their last 2 tokens. It's the end of the set. They get their reinforcer, and then you might do that for maybe a week. And then the next week, you're going to expect them to earn possibly 3 and 4 tokens. And you're going to continue to fade that back until you have utmost data, number one, to support that your decision is proper, but you want to make sure that you have the data to support that the token board is actually something that has value for your learner. So basically what I just said in the previous slides, you really just want to make sure that you're pairing the delivery of the token with something tangible to establish that value. You don't always need to use an edible. It's just something that is very small and quickly kind of, it has a very concrete ending. Once that edible is kind of chewed up and swallowed, it's all done and you can start again. You don't want to provide, if you are using edibles, you don't want to use a gummy or a fruit snack, something that the student will have in their mouth for a long period of time, because you wouldn't want to present the instruction again if they still have access to that edible. So a small chip, a small piece of chocolate, popcorn, anything that would be safe for your student to ingest based on their preference assessment on their IEP, or what has been approved from home. You could also, again, use bubbles, a light up toy, like those spinny light up toys, or something really quick. Anything that you can think of that would help your student make that connection between the token and the reinforcer. Token boards are definitely easy to set up and use. We have a whole file folder of them in the program that I work in. So if one's not working, we maybe switch a character or try a different format. They're definitely easily adapted to individual needs. Again, like 3, 5, 10, 20 tokens. They allow the instructor to reinforce immediately while delaying that reward or prolonging the work interval. And it definitely does keep learners motivated. You might say, like, come on, man, you only have 1 more token to earn, and then you get, you know, your higher level reward. We can do it. Let's do it together. Really just keeping that motivation up and high. So we've talked about a lot of things today, kind of broken up into segments. We've talked about discrete trial instruction and all of its components. We've talked about data collection, positive reinforcement, preference assessments, the pre-MAC principle, and behavioral momentum. And then we just finished up with token economy. If you have any questions about any of the content in the presentation that we just reviewed, definitely feel free to email me and I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks so much.